So let's look at the screenings that I've included. Some of these you may be using, some of these you may not. I just pulled some of the most common depression screenings so that you are able to have different options. This one, first one is the Burns Depression Inventory, or the BDI, not to be confused with the Beck Depression Inventory, also known as the BDI. But the Burns Depression Inventory was created by David Burns, who has written, I highly recommend this book, The Feeling Good Handbook. It is a classic therapy handbook, workbook. It's been around for decades. David Burns is one of the foremost CBT experts and is really skilled in anxiety and depression treatment. And so really encourage you to, if you don't already have that, get the Feeling Good Handbook, which is a classic resource and tool to have if you're working with clients that have depression, especially, but also anxiety. Okay, so we have the Burns Depression Inventory. So you can see here that the goal of this assessment is to gather information on these core areas. So sadness of the client, discouragement, low self-esteem, inferiority, guilt, etc., etc. Irritability, loss of interest, motivation, poor self-image, appetite changes, sleep, loss of libido, hypochondriasis, and suicidal impulses. So you see, again, we're always assessing and trying and wanting to include assessing for suicide. So that's the BDI, Burns Depression Inventory. And here's a checklist. So if you'd like to administer this particular screening to a client for several weeks in a row, this is a way for you and the client to be able to keep track of scores. Are they remaining the same, going up, going down? As you begin to use behavioral activation strategies, it's always great to re-administer these tools, because if the client is finding success with the treatment, then you should see that the scores are beginning to decrease. And that can be very encouraging to the client to have a concrete sense that, oh, my score was 34 and now it is 29. So that can be very affirming during treatment. The next one that I want to share with you is the DASS 21. And the reason why I like this tool is it's a good tool to be able to assess for depression and anxiety. And so for clients that may be presenting with both presentation in both areas, this is going to be a great tool to capture both of the symptomology in those two areas. So we're asking clients in this one over the past week. So we want them to really identify the specific time frame and whether or not these things apply. You can see here, I'm not going to read all these questions, but you can see all the different questions. There are 21, that's why it's called the DASS 21, 21 questions to be able to assess. And when we go to the following page, you see the scoring here. Just gives you some information, how it's divided into different categories, assesses things such as dysphoria, hopelessness, lack of interest. The anxiety scale assesses arousal, situational anxiety, etc. And then the stress scale. So whenever you see the letters D, A, or S next to the questions, that stands for, is it a depression question, an anxiety question, or a stress question? And then you can see that you have your table of scores here. With any screening, you would want to document what screening you're administering, what the client's score is, and then your intention of when you would like to re-administer it, in a week, in a month, in 3 months, or whatever kind of time frame you imagine might be helpful. All right. Can you re-administer an unlimited number of times? I don't think that there's any restriction on administering assessments. I think, if you over-administer, for example, there's nothing wrong with administering an assessment several weeks in a row, especially if it's for a short period of time. For a period of a month, you're going to be administering the same assessment tool every session. But hopefully after that month, you'll be able to go to every 2 weeks or every month and begin to decrease that. I would say you can overdo it from the client's perspective of having to answer the same questions week after week or every few weeks. But I think if you provide the client with a rationale, why are you asking me these questions so often in every session? If you give them information on why you're why the frequency is there, that may be helpful. In fact, best practices, and this is tough, I know it's tough for me as a clinician, is once you've done those initial assessments, we kind of forget about that. We get into the treatment and we're into the therapeutic relationship, and many times we never re-administer an assessment, and oftentimes that can be very helpful. 6 months down the road, a year down the road, let's see where you're at. Are there any pain points, new pain points? What are your successes? It's also a great way to recognize improvement, either a decrease in a score or a decrease in a certain question. So even though these questions are written in kind of the deficit form of what are the symptoms, we can still use these assessments from a strengths-based perspective.